Tired of the status quo in Scottish football? This is where the change begins. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Improving Scottish Football podcast. My name is Kieran Hennigan, and we have a superb episode in store with Keith Lasley today. So Keith is the Chief Operating Officer at St Mirren. He's done his UEFA Pro licence, he's done a Masters in Sports Directorship, and he's made over 400 appearances for Motherwell. We'll get hopefully the exact number from Keith directly, but just before we kind of dive in, if you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe or follow button and give us a 5-star review as well if you can. It helps, the channel build momentum and grow the audience. And fundamentally, it's just nice to know that there's lots of people out there who care about changing Scottish football for the better. So there we go. Now that I've said that, Keith, very warm welcome to the pod. Thank you for joining us. I've given you a bit of an introduction, but do you want to give us a little bit more and fill us in on anything that I might have missed there?
Yeah, well, you've misqualified electrician, Kieran, for a start. Your research maybe never went back that far, but happy to be here first and foremost. Thanks for having me. I think that is the thing that you missed on my pretty different route into football. It was via a couple of building sites in Glasgow, I think you've summarised that pretty well. A different route to the point I'm at now, as you say, as a Chief Operating Officer at St Mirren, but obviously predominantly at Motherwell as a player. Just under 500 appearances, I think. I don't know the exact number, to be honest, but it's in the high 400s somewhere. Had a great time there. Obviously, then went on to coaching, and 4 or 5 years of that, and being assistant manager to our current manager at St Mirren, which is an interesting dynamic. And then ultimately it led me to the role that I'm in at the moment. So, a very some ups and downs along that whole route, and so obviously some different roles within that, but. It's been a great learning experience the whole way along, and I've obviously had different touch points in the game, and now sitting in obviously a slightly different role than I was before, strictly on the football side.
And how are you finding that new role? Because obviously, it is quite a bit of a change from what came before.
Yeah, as listen, having an underlying knowledge of playing and coaching and assistant manager, I think stands me in good stead in this role. But I think the role I have at St Mirren, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more, but it is a very wide-ranging role. We have a kind of board of directors, and then myself really that oversees the whole operation at the football club. From the academy to the first team to the sort of commercial aspects of the gate, of the club, facilities, everything really. So it's been a learning curve in many of those other aspects, and still is. I'll be 3 years in May in the role, and I think like anything, the bits you don't know, you learn quickly, and the bits you do know, you still try to continue to learn. Football's one of those businesses you don't. I'm sure there's guys that have worked in the game far longer than me that are still learning things, because I think the game evolves and the game moves on. So, I think it's something that you never stand still, and you keep learning anyway. So, all encompassing, but very, very enjoyable.
And what about kind of the strategy and longer term vision for the club? Because obviously you've done this master's degree in sports directorship. From my reading, I think only about 900 people worldwide have been educated to a master's degree on it. So that kind of puts you in a bit of a top tier when it comes to the subject. Are you finding that you're utilizing some of those skills in your role? Although the role is technically Chief Operating Officer, are you finding yourself doing some of those sporting director, football director kind of responsibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I went to do my masters, it was very much I had I was already coaching. I was very much someone, when I was playing, I always wanted to plan for the next thing. I mean, I think it's probably came from my upbringing, or not my upbringing, but my route into football. As I said, it's a bit of a joke earlier, but in terms of my route into football, it was grounded in from a real job in inverted commas, and I was always thankful for that because it gave me a appreciation just for being involved in football on any level, to be perfectly honest. And it was always driven then to can I just try and stay in football for as long as possible, and by that. Stretch, then it was really just for me to try and educate myself as much as possible to give myself as many opportunities to stay in the game, and that first and foremost was a coaching from a coaching perspective. So I think by mid-20s I was already kind of well into my coaching badges and had my pro license in my early 30s, and it was really down to that hunger, as I say, to stay in the game. And football management was probably where I saw my future ultimately, coaching and then football management. And then it was towards the end I'd kind of finished my pro license, and I was thinking, I had that kind of 1 or 2 year lull where I wasn't doing anything. I thought, right, I want to go and do something else. And when I had a look around, there was actually a few Scottish names that I'd seen had went and done a course, actually the same course that I meant to do. David Weir being one of them, who's currently now sporting director at Brighton. And a couple others. Robbie Nielsen actually is another one. Was another one that did the course, and it was down at Manchester Metropolitan University, because there's only so many universities that actually do it in UK. So I inquired about that, and really the part of it that intrigued me was that strategic part of it. I thought it was something that suited me as a person, even as a coach. I was always very sort of analytical and strategic in my thinking, and it just suited me. It's just you can coach in obviously so many different ways, but that's just how I'm wired up. I think that way. I need structure and process. I think it's how I operate to my best, and I think it's how an organisation should operate at its best. So that's the thing that kind of brought me to the course. And then what the course then did deliver was a series of modules, really, around leadership, around strategic operations, around creativity and innovation, around governance, and all of these things, and really kind of condensed it into a course and it has really given me a good sort of foundation, really, to take into this role that I'm doing now. And that's why, you mentioned the strategy. Our club strategy was so important. It was one of the first things that I wanted to do, was really, devise one, make sure it contained the right, the right things and the right framework for us personally as at a club at St Mirren, which I think is a huge part of it being bespoke to your set of circumstances. And I think it's really just given the club a platform and a framework, as I say, for us to hopefully. Again, what a strategy should do, in my opinion, is really give you the opportunity to be greater than the sum of your parts, essentially. It allows you to, that piece of alignment. And you talk about sporting director, that is the one word I think that role is there to do. It's there to align, it's there to align goals, align processes. So those things together has really led to then me coming into St Mirren. I think it was one of the first things, as I say, I wanted to try and implement, and we managed to then deliver that, or certainly launch it October 23 for us. So it's a really important document. We've since we released an impact report in December 24. And again, it's just hopefully given us that, as I say, that framework is and that consistency, a set of values, a vision, and something that really hopefully aligns our key decision making, which it's there to do.
Yeah, and we'll come on to the strategy shortly and dig into it a little bit. But yeah, just on this kind of director of football, and I guess there's a few different terms, right? Sporting director, football director. Rangers have got a technical director, Celtic have got a head of football operations. They all kind of do roughly the same thing. Is that fair? And also, how important do you think that kind of role is for a modern progressive club? Because obviously some clubs still don't have that kind of role in place.
Yeah, I think it is important. I'll probably be biased in my opinion because I've went and studied it, literally, went and studied it and can really understand the value of it. I've seen the evidence that backs that up, and I've kind of written about it along the way. So I do think it's a challenge for some clubs. Just in terms of just staffing levels and be able to accommodate a sporting director. At smaller clubs, it might just be a challenge financially to try and implement that extra layer, if you like. But I think over a longer period of time, I think it will bring a consistency to decision making that in football is difficult to stand, because with given financial pressures, given just the emotion that's in the game, the emotion of that sort of weekly up and down of winning, losing, three wins in a row, everything's fantastic. 3, 4 wins, everybody wants the manager sacked, and let's pivot and do something different. And that is the world we're in, and that exists in boardrooms. It's as simple as that. And I think you need to have real buy-in from the top. I mean, you can have whatever structure you want. Essentially, you need. From the boardroom, you need that buy-in to that structure that's below that, and a kind of long-term buy-in, a board of directors that are willing to be consistent no matter what the short-term sort of picture looks like. If you've got a set of medium to long-term goals to try and stick to, and something you really believe in, it can be crucial, and I do think it is the optimal model to have. To, as you say, the names can be different, and the exact remits of each of those positions can be slightly different depending on the club you're at. But I think some sort of role that gives a consistency above just the here and now, that short-term results, I think is certainly, I would say, is desirable for clubs.
Cool. Okay, so let's chat a little bit about strategy and vision, because I think it's fair to say, top clubs would typically have a clearly published strategy on their website, so that everyone kind of knows what they're aiming for, what they want to be, and the fans can kind of buy in to that direction of travel. And it's important for fans, right? Like, you want to know what your club wants to achieve and where they want to be. So St Mirren, I think from when I looked at it maybe about a year ago, we're the only club in the Premiership to have a published strategy on the website. Motherwell have since kind of followed suit, but I think pretty much it's only St Mirren and Motherwell really that have that kind of clear published strategy. So talk to us a little bit about what made you really want to get it out there, and also obviously tell us a little bit about what the kind of key pillars are of it as well.
It's really important, and it's interesting, the two clubs that you mentioned, obviously two clubs I've had experience of and having experience of, and they're both fan-owned clubs as well, which is an interesting sort of angle to it as well, because I think a big aspect for us is, we are owned by our fans, and by our supporters. So it's really incumbent on us, I think, to communicate clearly what we are trying to achieve. And I think the other thing about it as well, back to that sort of longer term piece, I think there's a realisation at Motherwell and now at St Mirren, we won't win every game of football. We just won't do it. We'd love to, but there's a reality there in the short term that we're not going to win. But how do we, over a longer period of time, how do we incrementally kind of grow and give ourselves the best opportunity? Again, I use that phrase, to become better than the sum of our parts, or and get in a very competitive environment with varying, bigger clubs with more resource, and which I think is getting ever more challenging, that landscape. How do we continue to compete? And I think you need to have more than just that sort of week to week, or month to month, or even season to season pivot on strategy, because I just don't think it gives you the best chance over the longer term of actually, remaining competitive and actually just growing both as a business and just as a club, as a brand. So it was really important to me that I arrived at the club and I felt the club was doing some fantastic stuff, both on and off the pitch. But it was very silo in nature, I felt, when I went in, and I felt as if, look, if we can just join this up, both from a sort of, goals and vision sort of piece, if we can just join the academy to the first team a bit better, and the football operation to the kind of off-field operation, and, people actually speaking to each other and talking to each other, and that sounds very simplistic to say, but you'd be absolutely amazed walking into some clubs where the kind of breaks are in communication, or can be. And and I think I just seen the strategy as a real something that could just really sit at the centre of the club that would just align all its activities essentially and really point it in one direction. That is it in its simplest form, really. And also, I mean, you mentioned the fans. The other thing that I think it does is it aligns the actual internal staff as well. And I think, in my experience from the football side and the non-football side, there can almost be a little bit of a disconnect of, what the bigger pieces that those non-footballing staff, I would say, are actually connecting to. They see a game of football happening every other Saturday at the stadium, but what part do they play in that? What part do they play in the team winning a game? Or, as I say, the whole football club moving forward. And I think it can also act as that kind of motivator for the staff as well to kind of they all of a sudden see, all right, okay, that's the part I play in it. That's where we're going. That's number one. And then the next part is, how do I contribute to that? And I think it can hopefully act as a as a document and a route, a direction of travel that can motivate staff as well. So I think that was the key for the actual having it in the first place. And then the next part is, what should it say and what should it be in relation to St Mirren? And that's when I think, there's probably fundamentals within a strategy that do probably transfer across most clubs, because, there'll be just sort of stuff that is transferables that you just have to do. But I think it's really, really important that it's bespoke to your own club. It's bespoke to where, what you are as a football club. And that's eventually when we broke it down into our key pillars, which is, three key pillars for us. And our mission is to become the best community-centred development club in Scotland. So that is a club that is anchored in its local community, and it is, the best at developing talent, essentially, in Scotland. And to try and achieve that, then you need to say that how do we get there? And how can we break it into a memorable something that people can connect to, essentially. And we broke it into three key pillars, which were Paisley, people, and performance. And very, very quickly to fly over them, Paisley, again, just is about that community piece, that community impact, how we deliver that, how we link in with local institutions like UWS, other West College Glasgow, local schools, and then how through our foundation and street stuff programs and things like that, how we deliver our community impact. Our people pillar, which again is just about developing our people, whether that's players, whether that's staff members, whether that's just people connected to the club, and then finally performance, which is as it says in the tin, really, it's just provide a performance both in the environment and the facilities and our kind of alignment, again, using that word again, that alignment of our strategy to help give us the pathways to try and deliver as many young players through into our first team, and really ultimately, obviously, the team's performance itself, which recently on the whole has been good, but we just need to try and put the building blocks in place to give ourselves the opportunity to perform as well as we can, as often as we can. So those are the three key pillars for us. And again, it feels bespoke to us. It's we're not trying to be anybody else, and it's trying to set out, really, as I said, in a bespoke manner, how we can achieve what maximise our own potential. And I certainly firmly believe that the strategy can or is helping us try to deliver that.
You spoke a little bit about you wanting to be the best at developing young talent, and you also mentioned about trying to join the academy up to the first team. So were these things that hadn't really been addressed fully before? And talk to me a little bit about how you're going to do that and bring through that young talent. And also, obviously, a massive issue in Scottish football, giving young players minutes. Obviously, you've had like Evan Mooney, getting some good minutes. Just talk to me about how you're actually backing that up, I guess, on the pitch.
Yeah, again, when I mentioned there, and I feel I'm not a guy to come in and say, look, right, everything was rubbish before I came in and now we're doing everything's great. It's not really about that. I think there was some really good work getting on at the club, but I felt it just need joined up a bit better. The lines of communication for me weren't as good as they should be or need to be to give ourselves the best chance to to bring through our own talent, and there's absolutely no getting away from this. If I can point to one thing that I think is absolutely crucial for us as a club, both from a sporting sense, but a kind of business sense as well. We need, this is not a want for us. This is that we need to get better at producing our own players and transitioning more players through to the first team. And I'm happy to admit we are not doing that well enough at the moment. And we need to try and put the things in place. So that is actively what we are trying to do now. And a lot of it is down to alignment. A lot of it is down to communication. One of the small things that we've introduced here is we have a football board now, which has basically had representation from the boardroom, through myself, through the first team manager, through the head of recruitment, through the academy manager. So it's, we sit, and that sounds like, oh, do all football clubs not do that? Well, in my experience, probably not, and it's really that forum that sits, that really sets our football direction, is basically just a small cog in the wheel, if you like, that just allows us to have the conversations and have the reporting structure and the processes in place to make sure that everybody is pointing in the one direction, essentially. Because in my experience of football, you have what is natural. The manager wants to win next week. That his absolute priority is to win the next game. The academy manager's priority is to, produce, players that he can deliver to the first. So it's, and that is fine. Those two things can coexist. But what has also got to exist is a sort of joined up piece where I come in and the board come in to make sure we can still achieve those things. But those two sets of priorities need to join at some point, and it's how they join, how often they join, what those lines of communication are, what those processes of sort of progression, and how that reporting structure of our better young players has been reported to the manager, how they integrate with the first team, how the academy coaches integrate with the first team coaches, and vice versa, how often that happens. All of these little things, I think, are the keys to giving yourself the right environment, that more, you give more young players more of a chance to get through to that first team. Ultimately, they need to be good enough, but you need to make sure the system allows it to happen, essentially. And we feel as if we're getting better at that. And one other key thing I would say just that we've changed is, I would describe we have a little bit more top-down methodology than kind of bottom-up. And the way I would describe that is, this transition phase, which, the recent SFA report I thought was excellent, actually. I thought it was really, really good, really informative. And we were kind of doing a couple of things ourselves, but we've certainly taken some findings from that ourselves and implementing them. And really, that 16 to 18 age, I would describe we have a lot more first team methodology pointing down the way than maybe academy coming up there. Because my experience, what used to happen is you'd get an academy player maybe that would play in follow an academy syllabus, as I say, almost up to a certain age, and then it would just be handed over to the first team. Here you go, first team. Here's a football player, right? On you go. You got on with him, and there wasn't really a sort of what I would class as almost a merging process into a first team mentality, a first team sort of, be that physical demands, mental demands, technical demands of a first team player. What was being delivered to a first team was an academy, a finished academy product, and then it would transfer into a first team environment. And that sort of merging process is what I think we need to do better as a whole, as a country. But certainly from an individual perspective at St Mirren, it's something that we are trying to get better at, and that involves more strategic loan process. It involves just, as I say, even the training to the upper side of our academy is becoming a little bit more influenced by the first team methodologies and first team demands, physical demands and mental demands. And I think that's the bit that we are really trying to focus on to get right, because I think we do and have had plenty of players up to age 13, 14, 15 that are got real potential, but I think just that drop off from 16 to whatever that looks like, 16 to 17, 18, 19, I know those ages can differ for when, those development ages. I think that's the bit as a country and certainly as a club we are really focusing on and getting better at.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay. And so, just in case anyone didn't know, the transition phase report that we're kind of talking about, this is the SFA released a comprehensive report focusing on that kind of transition phase for players, I think 16 to 21, as they move from academy setups to senior professional football. And I think the kind of key findings for that was, kind of underutilization of young talent, and they tried to contradict a lot of popular beliefs. They were trying to basically put out there that, playing a young player doesn't negatively affect a team's performance. Okay. And do you have any other kind of thoughts on that kind of transition phase report?
Yeah, no, as I say, I liked it overall. I think there was an ECA report as well that came out at a similar time, and I think they were all pretty much saying the same things. I think the interesting thing it brought out to me, or one of the interesting things, was almost failure being a part of success at that age, and we've seen that where maybe some loans that don't work out are seen as a failure, but actually they're part of a journey, a development journey. And I think in earlier loans as well, again, something that we are focusing on. So we are certainly considering now that as soon as the players come into the building, that they actually have a different experience alongside playing in our under-18s or 19s team or development team, that there's actually some sort of loan that runs alongside that. And the reason for that is just the difference of experience. And sometimes that loan might not, in inverted commas, alone be a success, but what we believe it does, it gives it would make the next experience better, and hopefully the next experience then the one that maybe is the loan or the experience that then takes them towards their first team. Listen, there's some young players that don't need any loans or anything, they just go straight to go and go straight into the first team, but every player is different. Another big piece of work that we're doing at the moment is actually in conjunction with UWS, back to the strategy and kind of linking in with local institutions. We definitely feel there's we're doing a couple of bits of research in the psychosocial development of our young players, and we've certainly seen a shift or we are researching currently, but anecdotally seen a shift in terms of the psychological development of young players in terms of their resilience and confidence, and particularly when it gets to that age. Because again, going back to, and it's always that, all back in your own day and all that, I just think society's changed a lot in 20 years, 25 years when I was breaking through. I think the role of the parent has grown hugely. And I think young players can be almost kind of cocooned a little bit more than they used to be. So we are certainly doing a bit of research to try and research that as well, in terms of how that's maybe affected their psychological development and being resilient and ultimately having what it takes between the ears to become a high performing athlete, which is not easy. It takes a lot of sacrifice, and it's not a linear journey, and I think we need to we need to continue to look into that aspect, and again make young players aware, and then hopefully give them the tools to be able to handle setbacks and able to handle the journey essentially of what it actually takes to become an elite athlete.
So are you kind of more optimistic then for this next generation of young St Mirren players coming through from the academy? Are you hopeful that you're going to see an uptick in the amount of academy players going on to actually play for the first team?
Yeah, absolutely, Kieran. I do honestly believe that. I think now where we are at the club, I just think we are far more aligned. I think there's an understanding, as I say, from the boardroom, through myself, through the first team environment, through the academy, that our communication lines are far better. What we want to achieve is kind of clearly set out. How we're going to get there is clearly set out, or how we're going to try to get there is clearer in the way it's set out. And I mean, we're just hopeful that with the confidence of the people that we've got in the building as well, in terms of the staff that we feel can give the young players the best chance and facilitating that journey. Yeah, I mean, I'm very hopeful and very optimistic that we can do it, and in many ways we need to do it. I think it's the future of the club and the sort of prosperity of the club. Um, it's really, it's my vision for the club. It's what I want the club to become. I want it to become, back to that strategy. I want people to look at St Mirren, see a St Mirren badge, and say, right, they develop young talent. They're an anchor in the local community. They develop their own talent and they perform on the pitch. If you can turn around to me and if I, 2, 3 years time, whatever it may be, and you can look at a St Mirren badge and think about those things, then hopefully I've certainly done part of my job, and certainly I would be optimistic that we are at least putting the things in place to give ourselves the best chance.
Great. I'll hold you to that and I'll get you back on the pod. I'll get you back on the pod in a few years' time.
Record that.
Um, the SPFL as an organisation, do you think it could benefit from a strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk for them, but yeah, I mean, I think. Oh, listen, I could, talk so much about the Scottish game as well. I feel so passionate about it as a whole. I do get a little bit worried about it in terms of what the club. I think the kind of competitive balance, shall we say, of the product as a whole, and I think we need a strategy that reflects the whole game essentially, and probably actually if we just go back to kind of player development, and I don't know, maybe we're going to go into this in the conversation anyway, but I don't think there can be a kind of one size fits all to player development as well. I think there's got to be a bit of a if you take the sort of Club Academy Scotland outlook the way it's been traditionally, there's been a very kind of one size fits all input led sort of system in terms of grading whether you're an elite academy or not. And I think the clubs, for instance, Rangers and Celtic can be elite player developers, but so can we. I mean, our facilities are totally different, our finances are totally different, but we should be able just to do it in a slightly different way. And I think from before, there's always been a bit of a checklist tick box, right? Have you got, so many pitches? Have you got so many staff? Have you got so many this, so many that, so many this? And I understand there has to be a kind of spine of a set of compliance to be able to run an academy, but when it comes to it, we might not want a B, or no, not want a B team. It might just not be in a cost benefit analysis. I wouldn't actually choose to have a B team as St Mirren because it just doesn't make any financial sense. What we need to try and utilise is the loan system or cooperation agreements if they come in and things like that. So using that just as a very blunt example, we can still develop players to an elite level, but we just do it in a slightly different way that suits us, essentially. And I think that's that type of thinking across Scottish football from an SPFL perspective or SFA perspective, where Club Academy Scotland sits. I think that's the type of thinking that we need, that we cater for all clubs in Scotland and how they can, play their part. If we're talking nationally here as a national sport, how do they play their part in developing the next kind of generation of talent? We're not all going to do it in the same way. You'll have a similar sort of spine, as I say, but we are going to do it in a different way, and we should be allowed to do that. And there should be a more qualitative assessment of academies rather than a quantitative one. And I think that's something that we should look at. And I kind of went off on a tangent there back to player development because I think that should be reflected in the SPFL as well, and SFA. When you're promoting the game, what should be promoted is the sort of diversity in the clubs as well, and the product in Scotland should be delivered in that way and should be promoted in that way because there's so many stories out there at these other clubs and how we are trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve. And I'm not quite sure that's still being told the way it should be from a central standpoint. And I think that's what I would like to see, happen more from a kind of SPFL, SFA sort of perspective.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And before we recorded, we were also talking a little bit about government involvement in Scottish football, and that was an area you felt quite passionate about as well. What do you think government should be doing more of?
Um, I think more is the word. I just get frustrated. I see a good example was probably our European matches earlier in the season, and we had the fortune to go to Reykjavik to play Valur in Reykjavik, and then Brann in Bergen in Norway. And the real consistent what we found, and I found it a bit when I was lucky enough to play a few games in Europe as well, and predominantly I think Scandinavian countries are good kind of examples of this. There just seems to be, if we use facilities, for instance, as one area, the clubs we went to in Reykjavik, for instance, I think there's like a dozen Tory Glens. There's a dozen indoor
Yep.
sort of arenas in there, and what you find a lot of them, they're actually jointly funded. There's some sort of funding, um, joined up with the government and the football club in that small area of Reykjavik where it's that joint venture. And the sell there is that the clubs, and this is what I find in Scotland, and it's certainly our football club, our kind of community impact and our footprint in our local community is tangible. It is, we have a real positive effect. And so do all football clubs. This is not me kind of giving ourselves a pat on the back here. I'm just saying, I'm talking about Scottish football as a whole. I think it is that positive an effect on the kind of culture of the country, the health benefits that it brings, the economy, everything that it brings. I think there just should be a lot more joined up thinking between government and football of using that power of football and that positive power of football. And what football lacks sometimes, or certainly at clubs like ourselves, is that opportunity to invest in facilities that would hopefully even magnify the community work that we do even more than we currently do. And it really frustrates me with local councils and governments that it's never them chapping their door, put it that way. It's always going the other way. And I
Yeah.
would love that to change, and I would love that those conversations to be a lot more proactive from the government side, because I think personally, I think they're missing a trick, because in terms of bang for your buck and investment, I think football clubs would deliver or have the potential to deliver even more than they currently do. And I think with government backing and some joined up strategies, dare I say it, then I think there could be even more achieved across the board.
Well, this is it. If anyone is kind of interested in that whole kind of that politics conversation, I'd like to kind of point people to an episode I did a few months ago with Henry McLeish, who's the former First Minister of Scotland, obviously author of the McLeish Report, and we kind of dive into all that sort of stuff. But yeah, football is a force for good, or certainly can be a lot of the time. Everything from, as you say, from the economy to the health benefits. And it just amazes me that in a country like Scotland, where football is so ingrained in our DNA, even if you are like not a football fan, you can't escape it in Scotland. And the whole, we like to cart out the per capita stuff and everything like that. It's just amazing that we don't have more investment in it from a kind of government level, from my perspective, because so much of our lives, like I say, even if you're not a Scottish football fan, you're still carried along somehow with Scottish football. It's just so ingrained in our culture and our identity. Listen, Keith, we could obviously keep on talking forever. What before we kind of wrap up, is there anything else that you would really like to talk about, or any other points that you want to get across?
No, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of it. I think what you were saying there about even just the general sort of, how we talk about our game and how our game is showcased and sold. I just think we're still not really. You mentioned the per capita bit there. I still don't think, as a product, as Scottish football as a whole, we really have a joined up strategy to shout about that. I think it's brought up at certain times just when it suits to say, oh yeah, we've got the best per capita. Right, great. What are we doing about that though? How are we? Where's the strategy that really shouts about that? And even from a kind of broadcast sales point of view, the next cycle's 29. What's the broadcast cycle landscape? Sorry, going to look like at that point? It's could be interesting. So what are we doing from now until then to really shout about a central sort of strategy, Scottish football? What is it? Let's get it together and define it. And to me, it is around the passion of the supporter. You know, it's about supporter experience at football matches. It's all about that. I still don't really feel as if we hear that or can see that or feel that or touch that yet. And I think that's something that certainly needs a bit more central focus if we are to kind of continue or just to thrive as a game, because I think there is so much passion for the sport. As you say, it touches everybody in one way or another in this country. The vast majority of people are touched by football somehow. I still just don't think we define ourselves with enough, I don't know, just USP, which I think there is. We have got USP. I just don't think we've defined it properly and shouted about it enough yet. And I think that's going to be really crucial, as I say, particularly up to the run-up to the sort of next broadcast cycle in 29.
100%. We can't stand still. And I guess that's what this whole podcast is about. But yeah, we need to define ourselves, market ourselves better, and hopefully that one of the benefits of that will be a better TV deal. Yeah. Hopefully, and
I think that is that passion, that's player development, it's facilities, it's all of those things. And again, I look back to those Scandinavian countries, and you think of a Norway, Denmark. You probably think about all these things, don't you, off the top of your head? I do anyway. I think of player development, I think of facilities, I think about, those cultural aspects. And I think that's still where we're a bit behind. But I think it takes joined up thinking. It takes, people coming together to actually shout about that. And that needs to come centrally, because obviously the clubs in this country are very different, shall we say, and very different sets of priorities. I think that is going to take, a central, that would, back to the SPFL point, I think it really does need a central voice to command that and really start to control that and shout about it. I'm not quite sure we're there yet.
Good stuff. All right. Well, that's a good note to leave the pod, Keith. Listen, thank you so much for coming on. Thoroughly enjoyed that conversation.
No problem. Thank you.
So, yeah, big thank you for coming on, and thank you to everyone who was listening.